All right. Hopefully, can you see my screen? A little grid on there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, good. All right, so today what I like to do is I like to pick just a couple of topics. I know your book really goes through a lot, and the one thing I don't like about how the book sets up some of these theories is it, like for example, Piaget, it'll go through infant and the sensory motor stage, and then chapter 6, it'll go through the pre-operational stage. It's a little wonky in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is just kind of feed you the theory all at once. So that way we can talk about it throughout the rest of the semester and not just go through each one of these, because I think it's really important to kind of see how they rack and stack together. Okay. So today we're going to talk about Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. So if you remember from chapter 1, I think it was chapter 1 or chapter 2, he was really the second theorist that was mentioned after Piaget, and it kind of fed into some of the models. But so Piaget, if you remember, only goes up to about adolescence or early adulthood. Erikson's more looking towards the social side of development, and it spans the entire lifetime of that individual. Okay, so his theory was actually, it was really influenced by Freud's theory, but he emphasized the role of culture and society as opposed to brain development and exploring one's environment. So culture and society played a really big role in his theory. Another key difference in his theory that Freud's theory really suggested that there was plenty of room for growth and personality throughout one's life. So this personality development, it really spans an entire life. And like I said, not just childhood. And that's something that Freud had also emphasized, if you remember. So Erikson assumed that crisis can occur at each stage. And that's going to be one of the things we're going to be looking at here in this category is crisis. What is the crisis? The crisis is what they navigate. It's one extreme or the other. That's either trust or it's mistrust. Okay, those are the extremes. Now it could be anywhere within there, and it oftentimes is. But what we'll see is if it's either far to the right or far to the left, that could ensue. The problems could ensue from that as well. All right. So the conflicts will be. I'm sorry, the conflicts, they involve the differences between the individual and their needs within that society. So those are where needs are really competing, and successful completion of each of these stages here. And I'm going to label these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Oop, we got an extra stage here. That'll be a bonus stage, fill in the blank. So it's an 8-stage theory, and successful completion of each of these stages can result in healthy personality and really the acquisition of these virtues, which will be in this column here. We'll look at the virtue that's achieved from this. So I'll go through each one of these, and these very basic virtues are basically their characteristics or strengths, which we can really use to resolve future conflicts. Okay, so what we learn within each one of these stages kind of feeds into the next stage, if that makes sense. And I'll kind of walk you through some of these examples. So failure to actually complete one of these certain stages, it can result in a lowered or reduced ability to move along to further stages. And it can lead to more unhealthy personality and sense of self. So we're going to look at negative outcomes. I'm going to put a little minus sign here as the results. Okay. All right. All right. So the first stage we're going to look at is stage 1, and it occurs usually within the first year of life. So 1 year old or first year. And in this crisis, the stage that this focuses on is the idea of trust versus mistrust, like I mentioned earlier. So during this stage, a baby 1-year-old is pretty uncertain about the world they live in, right? That makes sense. You know, they're born, they're looking for food. They really need to resolve these feelings of uncertainty. They're born with basic instincts to sleep, eat, and poop, right? That's essentially what they do. But they look towards their primary caregiver or their parent for consistent care and stability. And if the child receives this care constantly or consistently, they're going to start developing a sense of trust and a sense of security. So this theory is really the hallmark of his theory of virtue and the virtue of hope, because which I'll put here, hope. Because when you develop that sense of trust, the infant can have hope that when a new crisis arises, there's a possibility that people will be their source of support. And failing to acquire this virtue can lead to the development of suspicion or fear or mistrust. Fear and mistrust, which are the negative outcomes. Okay. So the negative outcome would be fear and mistrust, or suspicion even. So as you can see, according to Erickson, this develops within the first year of life. So moving to the second stage, this occurs usually about, you probably guess, second year of life. Okay. And the crisis that categorizes this stage is autonomy versus shame. And, you can either put shame or doubt. I think the book uses shame, but it could be doubt as well. So what is autonomy? Autonomy is independence that we have either doubt or shame about that, right? So around 18 months of age to about 3, children begin asserting their independence by doing what? How are children independent? How do they become independent? Any guesses? What happens around 2 years old? What should be happening around 2 years old? What is the child doing? Walking, right? They're walking away from their mother. They're learning how to pick up which toy that they want to play with, right? Making choices about what they want to wear and what they want to eat. They get fussy eaters sometimes, right? So obviously the child is gaining a sense of independence and autonomy. And it's critical that children are able to explore their limits of their abilities within an encouraging environment. And rather than putting on the child's clothes, a parent should be supportive and have patience. Allow the child to do it on their own. Keep an eye on how they're succeeding, and maybe redirect if they're not doing well. But allowing them to make mistakes is really a big part of this. Learning and teaching the child how to ask for help when they need it, right? So if they get frustrated, guide them into what you're hoping they're going to achieve out of it, or what they're hoping to achieve out of it, and allow them to feel confident in themselves, right? And that's really the part of the autonomy that we're looking at. So the virtue that's gained out of this is will, right? They want and they achieve. So that's that they do that through their will. The negative outcome that can occur is shame, right? Are they criticized? Maybe if a parent is a little too guiding, it might come out as overly critical or overly controlled. And this might lead them to feel inadequate in their ability to survive. So they can start really lacking at this age. This is where we see self-esteem starting to lower or not build up, right? Not necessarily lower, but it makes sense. Like if somebody's shamed, they have a lower sense of self-esteem, and they start to feel shame and doubt about their abilities again. So those are the negative outcomes. So let's look at the third stage, which happens right around 3 to 5 years. Okay, so this stage, children assert themselves even more frequently. So the crisis here is really taking a look at initiative versus guilt. I think last class I spelled quilt on here. I got to be careful of that. Initiative versus guilt. During this period, primary features, they involve the child regularly interacting with other kids at school, right? So obviously play is central to this stage. Children are playing, they're learning how to explore their interpersonal skills. They're learning how to initiate and plan activities. They're interacting with their environment. So they're starting to feel more secure in their ability to lead others and make decisions. So at this stage, Erickson really proposed that a kid will ask a lot more questions, right? And we see that. Any of you that have kids or you work with kids, we see them asking a lot of questions in this stage, mostly because they've just begun to master language, which we'll talk about, I think next week or the week after. But their language ability starts. Last week, we talked about them babbling and cooing. And now at this stage, they're putting words together and they're inquiring about their environment. So they feel like they have a sense of purpose, what they do and the choices and the decisions that they make, that's all part of their purpose, right? And if the tendency is to ask questions and have curiosity squelched, like if a teacher, for example, is overly criticized and says, Billy or Bobby or whoever, that's a dumb question. Hold your question. Don't ask that. If we start controlling that, that might be annoying for them, and that might show up as guilt. Which is part of that crisis. So the child may feel as though they're annoying other people, and they'll start to act more as a follower versus having self-initiative during this stage. Okay. And that squelches, again, their drive and their purpose. So too much guilt can make the child actually really show interacting with others. It can be really an inhibition in their creativity. But obviously this comes with a caveat, because some guilt is necessary, right? We don't want, again, this is one extreme or the other here. We don't want a guilt-free child, right? There has to be a little bit of guilt there. Otherwise, the child wouldn't know how to have self-control. So they really need to have limits. And this is really important in the third stage. So purpose was the virtue. Sorry, I forgot to write that. And the negative outcome of this is having a sense of guilt or feeling of inadequacy, okay? I think I spelled that right. Okay, so moving on to the fourth stage. The fourth stage occurs right around the age of 6 and goes up to about 12 years old, okay? So here is where teachers take an important role, according to Erickson, in a child's life. Why? Because right around 6 years old is when they start going to school, right? So they're going to start teaching specific skills, and the child is going to they're going to work towards competency. So that major crises that we see here is going to be industry versus inferiority. So at this stage, the child will gain greater significance and greater self-esteem, and they're going to actually try starting to win approval from others, from teachers, from authorities, and they're going to do this by demonstrating specific competencies that they think are valued in society. So within society, they're going to start developing this sense of pride in their accomplishments, right? We see that through rewards. We see that through compensation of some sort, right? Many parents like to give treats or stickers or prizes, right? So this is a virtue of competence or pride. So I'm going to put competence. It's either competence or pride. I don't have a whole lot of room here to write a whole lot of words, so I'll just put 1 for now. So just to change, actually, I'm going to leave the same color here. So the main virtue at this stage is competence, and the children or the child is really encouraged by their initiative, and they're reinforced. And next week we're going to talk about learning styles, right? What kind of learning styles do children have? They're going to start to feel industrious and confidence, gaining confidence in achieving their goals. So if this initiative is not encouraged, or if it's restricted, and the child's really going to start to feel inferior and doubting their own abilities, and they may not even be able to reach their full potential. So that's really the negative outcome, is inferiority. Okay. And as a result of not feeling like that they have competence. So society is demanding, again, at this stage, some failure may be necessary so the child can develop modesty. So like I said earlier, up here, there has to be some sense of guilt for the child to have control of their actions. So let's say one's age 4, there has to be a little bit of failure within those limits. So the child develops modesty so that they don't feel overcompetent, right? Because that could be a bad thing. There has to be a good balance in there. All right, so moving along, let's go to stage 5, which is, I'm going to say 12 to about 18 years old. And again, I echoed this before. I'm going to repeat it now. These are not hard and fast rules. These are approximations. So last week we talked about how children or people are meeting certain milestones. If you have a child that's 3 years old and they haven't really mastered autonomy versus shame, yeah, that might be a little bit of a delay, but that might not be nearly significant. Now, if they get up to about 6 to 12 years old and they're still struggling with autonomy versus shame, or trust versus mistrust, we might see that reflected in their personality, which we'll certainly talk about in later chapters. So this transition from childhood to adulthood is probably one of the most important roles in Erikson's personality psychosocial development theory. So here, the child or teenager now is actually becoming more independent, right? And we kind of see that throughout each one of these stages. You know, they start walking, they start socializing. Now they're in school, and they're making friends there and exploring their worlds and their independence. That really kicks up a notch when they hit about 12 years old, because now they're trying to look at their future in terms of career and relationships, right? And even their families, so whatever. So they want to start to feel as if they're belonging to society and if they could fit in. So this is a major crisis that we look at here as identity versus role confusion. This is where they start developing their identity. So the child has to learn the rules and guidelines, which they'll occupy as an adult. So they may actually re-examine their identity to try and figure out who they really are. Body image plays a huge role in this, because the body is constantly changing during this time of age, right? Right around 12 years old is when they reach puberty. So they explore possibilities, and more based on the outcomes that they start to form this identity as a result of this exploration. Now, failure to do so here, the failure to negotiate this can result in the child, they may say something like, you can really pick this up in their verbiage and their words that they talk. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, right? And this can lead to role confusion. So the positive virtue here that comes out of this is fidelity. Okay. Or the ability to see themselves as unique, as an integrated person, as they're trying to identify who they are. Now, the negative outcome for this is more confusion, obviously, right? So it might show up as rebellious. And that's really all rebellion is. It's identity confusion. If they're not sure who they are or what they want, that can show up as like a fighting against the cause. Oops, fidelity, forgot a Y on there. Sorry about that. So those are really the hallmarks of the negative outcome of stage 5. Moving along, stage 6, we're going to move into young adulthood. So around 18 to 40 years of age. Okay. So here, the crisis that's being looked at is intimacy versus isolation. And I'll assume that, yeah, let me go back here a little bit. So the young, if we're younger, like around the 18-year mark, we begin to share ourselves more intimately with other people. We're trying to find love, and we're trying to explore relationships leading to longer term commitments. And completion of this stage can lead to comfortable relationships, a sense of commitment and safety and really care. So avoiding intimacy at this stage can lead to negative outcomes such as isolation or loneliness. Okay, so our virtue here is love, and the outcome, negative outcome, could be isolation. They might feel a little isolated from their peers, or not accepted by somebody, whatever their preferences for finding love, right? So here, really, they're forming close personal relationships, and it's characterized, like I said, by love. One thing that really I kind of want to hit upon here with relationships is looking through these first 5 stages. What are some areas that might crop up if they haven't mastered trust versus mistrust, or autonomy versus shame? How might that affect stage 6 here of Erickson's theory? How do you think?
If you don't trust, then you probably won't have good relationships or be able to be intimate. Or
Right.
yeah.
Right. Going back to trust versus mistrust. If mistrust leads to fear and possibility of abandonment, that could show up in relationships, right? That might be inadequacy, right? Or if we have initiative versus guilt, if they feel largely purposeless, that might lead to inadequacy in the relationship. So what we're doing now is we're carrying over these first 5 crises into a relationship, which can be good, and it can also be dangerous, especially if somebody is mistrusting. That might lead to some kind of codependency, or shame that might lead to inadequacy in the relationship, or guilt that could spill over into other person. You're really putting a mixed bag into the relationship if these other 5 have not been mastered or have been negotiated. Okay. So moving on, I'm keeping an eye on time here because I know some of you wanted to work in your groups. So the 7th stage occurs in really middle adulthood, and we're going to say probably around 40 years of age, and up to about retirement, which is 65. We'll just put 65 there. So adults begin to establish, or really they already have established their career. So they begin to settle down in the relationship and begin to make families the center of their lives. And they develop that part of this bigger picture. So here the crisis is generation or generativity. I'm sorry, generativity versus stagnation, not generation. All right. So generativity versus stagnation. Stagnation really means feeling stuck, as if you're not progressing. So usually adults, they feel as if they give back to society through raising their children, or being productive at their work, becoming involved in their community activities and organizations, right? So here they begin to develop a sense of care for others. They're looking out for the welfare of others, and the negative outcomes that can occur if they fail to achieve is the objectives that we start to feel stagnation or unproductive. So the virtue here is you develop a care for others, care for society. And the negative outcome is, oops, they're unproductive. Oop. All right. All right, so let's look at the last stage of Erikson's theory, which occurs right around 65 plus. Okay. And this occurs until plus is really until death. So here we're looking at senior citizens, and we tend to, as senior citizens, they tend to slow down their perfect productivity, right? They've accomplished a lot in their life, and they wanted, or we may not want to have really anything that could lead to negative outcomes through the rest of these. But we're going to explore life as a retired person. So the major crisis here is integrity versus despair. Oops, despair. So obviously, at an older age, we're more wise. And during this time, we can contemplate really back on our lives and reminisce. And people at this age, they start to realize if their lives are productive or maybe unproductive. So they might feel guilt about their past, or realize that they didn't accomplish something that they wanted to. So certain regrets or feeling dissatisfied. So the first main virtue here that we get out of this is really a sense of wisdom. But if we feel that we haven't accomplished what we wanted to in life, and we might start to feel unproductive, and that can lead to despair or dissatisfaction upon death. Now, many of you, I'm assuming all of you, have probably encountered somebody in this age range, right? Dissatisfaction. And kind of look back on that. Look back at the different personality styles that came out of that. You know, what are they doing? How are they looking at life? Are they satisfied with what they've accomplished, either with their families, or with their careers, or with their finances? Whatever was important to them, do they feel like they were wise, and do they exude that with younger generations, or are they just largely angry? Right, which might be an indication of dissatisfaction for sure. All right, so really that's all of Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Any questions? Did any of this make sense? Did all of this make sense? Any questions? We good? All right. So I was going to go over Piaget's cognitive development. I can do that next week. So I can give you a little bit of time. I'm going to try and figure out. So how many of you want to work with your groups today?
Me.
Yeah, me.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to set up groups. Actually, I'm going to stop recording here.
Can you do breakout rooms for each group?